Hope you're enjoying your visit here this evening. Now, on with the show.
Hello, this is Paul Stefan, and this is another edition of TV Free Baltimore's Film Reviews. And today, our guest is writer-director Erik Kristopher Myers, and we'll mostly be talking about his film, which is soon to be released, called Butterfly Kisses.
Behind me stands Ilchester Tunnel, a throughway for the B&O Railroad for over a century. But for the past 80 years, it has become something far more sinister.
And the very first one that I pick up says, final solution.
A young lady identifies herself as Sophia Crane.
And then it got a little upsetting after that. Got a little bit weird. There's no cuts. There's no retakes. There's no calling for action. There's absolutely no evidence to suggest that somebody is directing them.
We have the possibility that this whole thing is real. And we have the possibility this whole thing is a largely plausible hoax.
If you're working with all these elements, you can, journalistically speaking, you can construct your own story out of whatever footage you choose to put in there.
I do not believe that this video is authentic.
I think there's some acting involved, and there's some effects involved. And I think that it's kind of disturbing that he feels that the only way to market this footage is to pretend it's real.
This has been done 1,000 times before, and we think it's a scam. I'm not the only one, it's everyone. We're gonna take this footage to every professional in town that we can find. Ghost hunters, mythbusters. We're going to go to the radio stations. We're going to the TV stations. We're going to show the footage, and we're gonna saturate the market with this information. Then we're gonna prove to the world that Peeping Tom exists. The camera doesn't lie.
So welcome, Erik.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Where we always like to start for everybody is to say, what's your background and how did you get to film?
I've been a cinephile since I was very, very young. I loved horror films as a small child, Universal movies and the Hammer films, and later on began to sort of expand my interests outward. Storytelling was something that was always very, very important to me, and so I began writing screenplays and short stories and always dreamed of making films. And around the time I was in high school, I was doing a lot of theater and began working with some other theater students making terrible, terrible, terrible films, gangster movies and whatnot, and then I just never stopped.
Mm-hmm. And you went to film school, didn't you?
I went to Towson University, yes.
And you took their film program?
I did.
Okay. Because some people we've had in here had no film school experience. They just came from other disciplines, learned by doing, which you did too, a lot of.
There's a lot to be said for that. There's what you learn in the classroom, and then there's what you learn in the field. Right. And when I made my first feature film, Roulette, which was, financed on credit cards and was, a complete and total volunteer-based project with people who had day jobs and lives outside of this, shooting overnights, weekends, that's the ultimate film school. When you're actually out and trying to push the sort of limitations of experience and resources and equipment and all of that.
Right. Now, one of the things to say is, we have you down and you agreed with the credit of writer-director as opposed to a director who also writes his scripts, So do you see yourself as a writer first or as where the story is paramount to your films?
I think that, speaking strictly for myself, and other filmmakers might have different opinions on this, if you are writing the film that you're directing, they very much go hand in hand, and that you are writing the film 3 times. You write it on the page, and then you write it a second time when you're shooting, and then you write it a third time when you're editing. Mm-hmm. So even if you've not written the screenplay, even if you're a director working off of another script, you are still writing throughout the entire process.
Right. Gotcha. Now, but with that, though, here's one other thing I would ask you is because of budgetary problems that independent films have, do you, before you write a script, and let's say you start with an idea and say, well, this is the story I can tell on this budget. If I had a bigger budget, I could tell more of this story or tell it differently, or in the midstream, I should say, of the film, you have to do rewrites to go along with what you have at hand as well as the diminishing funds that you have.
Yeah, I mean, there are always concessions that have to be made along the way. Different filmmakers, particularly on the independent level, as you were saying, they approach their projects in different ways. Sometimes they say, this is the story that I want to tell, and if I don't have this location or I don't have the capabilities of doing X, Y, and Z, they actively pursue those elements. But they're sort of handcuffed to finding those things. I tend to work from the other direction, which is that I look at what I have access to. I look at the places where I can film, the people whom I can include, and typically in thinking about those things, that's what creates the spark. That's where the initial inception of the idea comes from. And then from there, it's just telling the story.
Right. Now, then we'll get in, I guess, to another thing that was on IMDb that kind of intrigued me. It was a trivia thing, but you can tell me if it's true or not. This is, he always has in every film a character named Zoe or Zoe.
Zoe, yeah, I have always included that character name as just sort of an Easter egg until Butterfly Kisses. I broke the...
There's no Zoe in that film.
There is no Zoe in that film. There is actually a prop that I specifically had made. It was a poster for a local band, and it's such a blink and miss it sort of thing in the film. Yeah. But the fake band on the poster is called Zoe Chainsaw. So I figured I slid the name in there somewhere.
Somehow.
Yes.
So it has no special significance of why you always use Zoe. Like where did that come from for you?
There's a screenplay that I wrote for a film that's sort of my dream project, and that in making various features, starting with Roulette, now with Butterfly Kisses, I'm constantly trying to go up the staircase. And this is one of the films sort of halfway up the staircase that I really, really want to make. And the protagonist's name is Zoe. And so as I began working on other screenplays, whether they were for films that I've produced or screenplays that I have sold to other filmmakers or what have you, I've always slid that name in sort of as like a good luck charm, sort of a rabbit's
I was going to say, I was wondering if it was a good luck thing, because I think there was a tradition in Hollywood that not everybody knows, but from my vast watching of films, is that many films, it was a good luck thing if you mentioned Baltimore. Baltimore comes up in a lot of the old movies, even if it's just as one line, oh, we were in Baltimore, or that happened in Baltimore. And I think that's, something that Hollywood threw in there. And I said, even then, we were kind of an obscure town in the 30s and 40s, so come on. Why did they say Baltimore?
Then hopefully Butterfly Kisses will be a massive success because the name Baltimore is all over the film. So.
Right, and Ellicott City.
And Ellicott City, yes.
I think people of Ellicott City should give you a nod for that film, especially since unintentionally a lot of your footage is pre-flood.
Yeah, and actually we've wanted to do some sort of a screening around the time that the film is released in the fall, specifically in Ellicott City and for the local businesses and the local people, because the film is in many ways a love letter to that area. I grew up out there, and one of the things that was very fascinating to me about Ellicott City, aside from the fact that the historic district is beautiful, it's incredibly atmospheric, with the cliffs and the river and all of that. There's also the fact that that entire area is known for being haunted. Whether you believe in ghosts or you don't believe in ghosts, the folklore aspect was something that always very much inspired me, specifically as a fan of horror films. And as you said, there was the terrible flood that occurred in the summer of 2016, and we got most of our footage prior to that. So all of our footage of the historic district is before that terrible incident. So we made a point in the credits of, giving our love and dedicating it to the people of Ellicott City, specifically the business owners who lost their wares.
Well, it was great because there were a couple quick shots that you have in there of the black and white footage of the two characters, Feldman and the girl, I think, in the wagon wheel, with the wagon wheels on it.
Yes.
And the wagon wheel was pretty much wiped out by the flood.
I have not been back.
That's what I heard. I
to
don't
some
think
of-
he's reopened or not.
I know a number of those businesses have not reopened. I've been down there once or twice, and it's unfortunate. I mean, again, it was that whole area was sort of where I hung out as a teenager.
Oh, okay.
And a number of those shops no longer exist. The Phoenix is there, but Coco Lane, which used to be one of my
Coco Lane
drink-
was a famous restaurant.
I used to do sort of creative writing sessions over there at Coco Lane. I would do beverages into the late night and discuss craft, and it's no longer there, and it's very, very unfortunate. It's very sad.
Yeah, and you also have a scene, which again, it's a glimpse. I guess one of your other watering holes, Red Brick Station.
Red Brick Station, yeah, that is actually probably my favorite place in the world to go, and I've been going there since they opened in '97. So I'm showing my age at this point, but.
You're on the man, believe me.
Red Brick is it's a place where I go for literally every single film meeting that I have, whether that's in pre-production or in post-production. If we're sitting down and we're discussing what we're trying to do, whether that's working with the crew or working with the actors or what have you, we go to Red Brick. That's the spot. So the owner, Billy Blocker, was very kind and let me come in and film there. And again, that's sort of I try to, being that this is very much a Maryland movie about Maryland folklore and Maryland businesses and all of these things, and Maryland public figures.
Right.
I wanted to, nod as often as I could to the places that I love.
Now, let's get into it a little bit more, because a lot of things I want to talk about with the movie. Where did the idea for Butterfly Kisses come from, and why did you pick that name? Because when I did the search, there's so many movies or short movies named Butterfly Kisses.
The name was chosen because thematically it makes sense within the context of the film, but also because just on paper, as you're saying, it is a very ambiguous title.
Yeah.
And because it's so ambiguous, it hopefully, if I've been successful, it makes you want to watch it to figure out what that's all about. What does this mean? Even if you watch a trailer for the film, which I just cut, the name Butterfly Kisses still isn't, outright explained. And it's like, well, I need to see this. I need to understand how A, B, and C fit together.
Right.
The concept of the film came to me in the fall of 2014. I had recently released my first movie, Roulette, and I was, again, thinking about what I wanted to do next and sort of putting together people, places, and things that I would be able to sort of utilize for a next film. And I saw a trailer either on television or in the movie theater for a found footage movie along the lines of the Blair Witch Project or The Last Exorcism or Paranormal Activity or
one of those.
One of those. And immediately, as is both a blessing and a curse for me, I tend to look at these, at films or newspaper stories or whatever, and my wheels start turning in terms of the nuts and bolts behind them. And I started thinking to myself, if somebody actually did discover a box of discarded footage, found footage, as was the premise of the Blair Witch Project during the late 90s when that film came out, and people thought for a few minutes that it was real. They thought it was a real documentary.
Right, exactly.
And all of these subsequent found footage movies have sort of taken that same tack. You're watching, real footage of a real alleged supernatural activity involving the disappearance of or death of the filmmakers. And I thought to myself, if someone really did find this footage, what would be the real life journey from discovering it to watching it to vetting it in whatever way to believe that it is actual legitimate footage rather than someone's unfinished horror movie? What would be the steps that you would take in order for it to end up ultimately in a movie theater? Would you take it to the police? Would you, what would you have to do with it?
Right.
And that's where the entire concept came from.
Because I guess it gives an idea of a little bit of the plot to people without giving it away. Part of it to me, too, is to say that it can be seen as sort of a faux documentary. It can be seen as a horror film in a way. can be seen as a mystery also in a way. So, I mean, do you have a concept of the genre that you feel it best fits in?
I think if you put it down on paper, the easiest way to describe the film is being a horror film. It is a faux documentary. It is a mockumentary. I love horror films, but by that same token, This is Spinal Tap is my favorite comedy of all time. I love the Kristopher Guest movies.
Right.
And so yeah, it's sort of a strange mashup of styles. I would describe it as being a horror film, but I don't know that it's 100% a horror film. It is as much entertainment as it is, I believe, a critical analysis of that particular subgenre of horror. It's looking at these sorts of films and saying, we are self-consciously and self-reflexively commenting on the tropes. What are the conventions of this genre? What are the things that stand out? What sets it apart from other horror? What is it that makes it believable or not believable?
Because for me, I see anything you could even approach as a point where horrificness is towards the very end of the film, as to what happens to the two young filmmakers in 2004. But my take on it was more, you know, you talked about the type of film, but I think it's also I don't know if you want to use a metaphor, but about filmmakers.
Yes.
Because it seems to me that there are three sets of filmmakers, and they all become obsessed with this subject. Because the kids do, she starts off saying, I'm making this student film project. And then it's something that grabs them, and they get caught up in the whole thing about Peeping Tom. Then you have Gavin, who is the wedding filmmaker who looks like he wants to make something big. And so you have that kind of obsession and desperation I see in his character. And at the very end, Erik, the filmmaker who you play, at the very end, even though it's left kind of ambiguous, it looks like he's caught the bug. And you could see, if you wanted to play in your head, now he's going to go to a chase and see if he can catch Peeping Tom on film, that he has gone beyond doing this film about Gavin to where it's grabbing him, whether you could say it's Peeping Tom or something has now roped in this filmmaker.
There's a lot to be said, I think, for the subtext in the film, which is, as you very rightly pointed out, it's a film about filmmaking in so many ways. And specifically, the creative bug and how that can take over our lives. Making independent films is very different from making Hollywood films. Right. As I said before, we all have jobs, we all have lives, some of us have families. And it is a process that can take several years. And that's several years of carving out time in order to do this. And so it has to become a priority. And especially for a filmmaker who is asking cast and crew to do the same, to give their time during limited numbers of hours in the day, you have to be able to deliver a final product. So many films are started and they're never finished. You not only have to deliver a final product, but you have to deliver a final product that is worthy of their time and investment. So it does lead to a certain level of obsession, for lack of a better term, and it can influence relationships. It can influence marriages. It can completely change your social life for good or for ill. And I wanted to comment on that in Butterfly Kisses from the sort of three levels being, you know, the film school experience, the I'm an adult and I wanted to be a filmmaker and now I think my window is closing forever, right down to the third story, which involved myself and my crew, which is, you know, we're sort of established professional filmmakers, but by that same token, we can't have this project that we're making fall apart. There's a lot invested in this for us. We're trying to go onward and upward.
Right, because, I mean, especially when you talked about showing the stresses, you see that in Gavin at home, where he finds out about how his wife's family have been supplying the money, and he's been using the money for the kid to finance the film, and their marriage seems to be estranged, and it seems a little bit, again, ambiguous as to whether she's left him or not. You know, and to say that you can see this is the strain, again, of the obsession and sort of like you said, the buck, you know, passed me by and now I'm never going to be a filmmaker, but I want this so bad. Because it's the other part you get into with the DC 101 and Ed Sanchez calls in, the whole thing about the skepticism of the public. The guy has got to the point where you're so into it, whether he actually believed it to begin, he's bought into it to the point where he wants to believe so much that it's real, that you can have that whole thing of the story or the trope of one man against the world. He's the one person that has the truth, and nobody believes him.
I think that every artist can say that at some time in their lives, whether they're filmmakers or they're writers or they're painters, dancers, musicians, whatever they might be, the only way to truly be able to create is, again, to be somewhat obsessed with your work. And the only way to truly be obsessed with your work is to love it passionately. It's like it's like creating a child and carrying it and bringing it out into the world. Often, what we love about it is so many times in our heads. We can only describe something that is unfinished. We can only describe our dreams that we've not yet realized. We know where we're going. We know what we're going to make, but people around us don't have that vision. They can't see it or hear it until it's there. And it can be a case where people around us don't necessarily believe in what we're trying to do or don't understand the importance of it, and so therefore don't offer the emotional support or significance that the artist feels they need in order to sustain themselves. So often we need that attention and that support. I'm not, speaking strictly of myself, but it seems to be a common theme with so many people that I know. And that was a thing with Gavin's storyline, is that he has something in front of him that he's 100% convinced is going to make him a millionaire. And everyone around him is just looking at it and going, this is just some dopey horror movie. What is this? Nobody cares. But he sees it, he believes in it, and his passion ends up alienating everyone around him.
Well, there's no belief because people say, oh, you faked that. There's some experts that say, oh, he probably faked that footage of the guy rising up out of the end of the tunnel kind of a thing.
Right.
There are so many ways you can do this trick, people say on the film. And so he gets discounted in a lot of ways. Until, I don't know, I guess these guys are real, the sound company guys that you talked
Studio Unknown, yes.
Studio Unknown, and they do this thing, what they think was supposed to be like the Morse code,
yes.
And then it becomes a visual, and it's the guy with the cloak and the top hat and the whole thing. And I said, well, maybe he did have something, but at that point, Gavin's missing or dead at that point.
Exactly.
And so he doesn't get justified. Now, in the movie, and I'll have to ask you about whether it really was this case, where it says, we don't, for Gavin and for the character of Erik, we don't have an ending to this film. Did you go through that struggle at any point to where you said, I don't know how I'm going to end this film, or you had different endings for this film?
No, it was always the same ending, and part of what I was commenting on there is the fact that many films in the found footage genre sort of build to an anticlimax. There's a common issue with trying to find a satisfying ending to a film of this sort, and they typically will end with people running through the woods or running through a dark house or something like that, holding cameras, and there's lots of screaming. But there's no big reveal, and it tends to end very abruptly. And I was trying to comment on that, while at the same time having the film include at the ending running through the dark, running through the woods, and screaming and yelling and things happening. And so that it was, again, it was very, very self-reflexive.
Now, did you have, like most independent filmmakers have, did you have budgetary restrictions or production challenges because of the budget?
Absolutely. And, the only way to get around those is to do a lot of favors, show a lot of gratitude, and wear many, many hats. Mm-hmm. It's really the only way to pull these sorts of things off.
What I saw is that since the type of film you did, it was a great way to say, okay, how can I make a good film on a low budget using, intentionally, as you said, unknown actors, real locations in many cases, if not all cases. The fact that there are some little glitches in the filmmaking you see from time to time, which even if they weren't intentional, you could leave them in because you could say some of them, except for the last crew, are semi-professional filmmakers or amateur filmmakers. So if you see a little blip or a rough cut or something, then you leave that in and say, boy, we don't have to do another take on that. So that, I think, worked to your advantage on that. How can you fit a micro budget and make a good film?
Absolutely. And that's always the struggle, but that's often the reward. It's art through adversity. What do I have right now? How can I make, rub two nickels together and make it look like $1?
Yeah. Well, mention something about your casting then.
I can't really talk too much about the casting right now because we are sort of waiting for the film to be released in the fall. We're getting very close to ironing out a final deal on that, at which point, when the film is released, we definitely want to make sure that we throw a spotlight on everybody involved in the movie.
Well, maybe not their names. I'm saying your casting choices. You don't even have to say who they were or why you picked them. Say, what kind of actors you were looking for and that sort of thing. In general terms.
We populated the film with so many real people playing themselves, right down to myself and my crew, that in terms of including individuals who were not playing themselves, in terms of having actors, it was important that I had people who were very, very experienced, particularly with improvisation. And so a theater background was more important than anything else. But I wanted to make sure that they didn't have much in the way of a film presence in terms of, a resume where they would be easily recognized. I wanted to make sure that I had people who knew what they were doing, but also had a very, very strong theatrical background.
Okay. Because with the acting, I was going to ask you, or you mentioned improvisation, with the scripting, I meant to say, that how closely scripted was it, or was it more like, this is the theme, this is what I want you to talk about, and now go?
It was a little bit of yes and yes. There was definitely a screenplay, and typically we would do about 3 takes, and it was important to me that we did one that was on book, and then we did one that was slightly off book, sort of say everything that was there, but feel free to color it and embellish it a bit, and then there was a 3rd take that was just run with it. And part of that, though, was that there were elements in the script or there were elements in the story that I had that were not in the script. And that was by design so that I could sort of spring things on people on camera.
Interesting.
And have them react to them and not have any, premeditated response to it. Okay. So there was a lot of that. In a lot of ways, the film was a very heavily scripted improvisation.
Okay. Now, the other thing I know from a previous interview you did, you said you wound up with about 3 hours of footage that had to be cut down in half to an hour and a half. Now, what were the challenges in getting it down to that 91 minutes and say, well, I didn't leave all this behind that was necessary to the story? Were you still able to keep your bare bones, or did you kind of, edit while you were editing, you were really shaping your plot and your story?
It was a battle for clarity. That was the main thing. 90 minutes tends to be the commercial standard, particularly for independent horror films. And so we managed to get it down to 91. But it was a 3-hour assembly, or just shy of 3 hours. And the process involved working with my co-editor, Kenny Johnson, who was also the cinematographer, and just mercilessly cutting fat, or in some cases, cutting tissue as well. But we tried to get it down as short as we possibly could, and the Frederick Film Office very generously did a fantastic test screening of an unfinished version of the movie. And they brought in viewers who had no idea what movie they were going to see, and they were given comment cards, and there was a Q&A afterward involving, a moderator. I was hiding in the back. I shaved off my beard so I wouldn't be recognizable. And we just heard what people thought of it, what worked, what needed more explanation, what didn't work. And that was very valuable. And at the same time, we were also showing the film to other people, other filmmakers, getting their feedback. And so it was a long and arduous process to get it down to 91 minutes.
Because, as opposed to some other films which maybe tell a straightforward story, you are intentionally trying to leave some things ambiguous anyway, but you still don't want to lose the thread or totally keep your audience in left field because you cut out too much.
Exactly. So, like I said, a battle for clarity. It was making sure that the ambiguity was not too ambiguous. It was making sure that things were not overstated. And it's difficult with a film like this. It's difficult with any film. You never know if you're too on the nose or if you're spoon-feeding an audience. But this film literally was the most difficult thing that I've ever edited.
Right. And then, of course, with every independent filmmaker, what have been your issues with, or what would you want to talk about, with distribution for this film?
There haven't been any issues. When I released Roulette, that was a film that had what was considered maybe a bit of a lengthy runtime. It was an hour and 52 minutes. There were some distributors who wanted to cut the film down, again, to get it to a nice 90-minute runtime. There was also some content in the film that caused viewers to react perhaps negatively. Some very, very touchy sequences dealing with abortion specifically. And so some distributors were a little bit afraid of it. It was also a film that dealt with Russian roulette, and this was after Sandy Hook, and it had a lot of buttons, a lot of hot buttons in the film.
There you go.
And so that was a question of just trying to find a distributor who would release it uncut, and we did, and that was successful in that regard. With Butterfly Kisses, this is a very different film from what I did last time. It's a more playful film, I think. It's more fun. And we are having absolutely no problem courting offers. It's just been a question of, it's been an embarrassment of riches. It's been sort of, what's the best opportunity for this film? And
will there be a theatrical release?
That's a good question. I'll let you know.
Okay, please do. Now, what about upcoming projects? What do you have that you can talk about?
I've got some things that are percolating right now, and nothing I can really talk about other than I've been having discussions with some collaborators. I've been having some discussions with some producers, and I've got about 3 projects right now that I'm sort of putting on the table and saying, all right, what's the most viable option at this moment?
Okay, and here's a good one. As a closing question, but I'll have one other question, is that will you remain a Maryland filmmaker, or if the opportunity comes, will you go Hollywood?
I don't know that I'm ever going to go Hollywood. I don't know that opportunity will ever be on the table. But I can safely say that the paradigm has shifted in such a way that a person doesn't need to live in Hollywood to go Hollywood.
Or Atlanta.
Or Atlanta. Films can be made anywhere. And, I think actors and a lot of crew people are going to be more tempted to go to where the work is, the regular work is. For a filmmaker like myself, I could go anywhere for a couple of weeks or months and make something and then continue to finish it here. Okay. I don't foresee myself leaving Maryland.
Well, terrific, because that's why I've been doing this series on Maryland filmmakers. We want to try to keep you all right here, but to get you all known.
Absolutely.
Beyond David Simon, beyond John Waters, beyond Barry Levinson, and maybe Matthew Porterfield.
Sure.
We want the other gifted people to be seen.
Well, we appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
Much.
What I want you to do is then look into your camera and give people your contact information.
You can find me on Facebook, E.K. Myers. You can find me on Twitter at E.K. Myers. That's EKMYERS. Butterfly Kisses Movie on Facebook. Find me on IMDb as well. I'm very easy to find on social media.
Okay. And another thing I think I ought to let people know is that this film will screen at the Maryland International Film Festival as the opening film on Friday night, April 27th of this year. If anybody can get out there, please go and see it, because it may not be in a theater or on some kind of platform until around Halloween. But I want to thank you, Erik, for being here today.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you.
You're welcome. And folks, that's the end of another TV Free Baltimore film review. And until next time, we'll see you.
We hope you're enjoying your visit here this evening. Now, on with the show.